everyone. Chris Nixon with IoT Monitor. I've got my co-host here, Kirill. Hey, Kirill.
Hey, guys.
And most importantly, our guest, Joe Baker. How are you doing, Joe?
Good. How are you?
Good. Let's start super easy. We'll throw you a softball. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of, what got you to this point.
Great. Yeah, we'll do. So my name is Joe Baker. I'm the Managing Director for IoT Hybrid Solutions. I've been in the security industry for about 25 years, primarily working on the design consulting side. Started at the United Nations. I drove the electronic security program for them globally, and then moved on my own with a partner, and we had a boutique consulting firm on the East Coast, primarily focusing on higher education, pharmaceutical, and campus type clients. Right prior to COVID, I decided to leave that organization, move out to the West Coast here in Seattle, start IoT, and kind of shift focus from a boutique design firm to also some subcontractor installation services. So it's kind of a hybrid integration model, but the focus is still primarily on electronic security, user experience, process, and just overall project management. So that in a nutshell is kind of what we do here.
Very cool. And so I know the topic today, I know it'll probably broaden a little bit as we get deeper into the conversation. I know one of the areas of focus for you has been cannabis, and some of your customers are in that space, and obviously emerging over the past decade or so has been rapidly emerging with some of the legal things changing, et cetera. So yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. So I know, we prepped for this a little bit and we spoke very briefly, and there's some unique challenges in that space, right? That maybe people aren't seeing and aren't thinking about. So why don't we dive in and maybe you can share a few of those.
Sure. Yeah. So interestingly about cannabis is kind of the difficulty and push and pull between the state legislation versus the federal, and how it's really not perceived yet from a federal perspective. So the business owner has to tread kind of lightly around how do they build their facility, how is the state's kind of expectations from a distribution, from manufacturing, building out their processes and able to function a business when there's still all these kind of gray areas. In the last couple of years, it has gotten a little bit better, but it's still a bit of a challenge for a lot of business owners. And I've got a couple of very large clients that I work closely with, and from a process perspective and from a technology perspective. And primarily, the biggest challenge is that they change their mind all the time from the state perspective, since it's such a moving parts of industry, right? There's so many things that are going on. The state isn't sure what they need to do themselves, so they push that indecision downstream to the business, and that creates a lot of confusion. It wastes a lot of money. It creates like duplicate processes, overlap in resources, things of that nature. So my team tries to help our clients with how to navigate through some of those challenges from a process perspective, from a communication perspective, and from a design perspective. And we're both Krill and I we have IoT in our name, right? So it's really a driving force of how's IoT really work within the cannabis space. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of just how important it is and what it is in the management of endpoints, whether it's a camera from a security perspective, whether we're looking at a loader, or we're looking at something as simple as a door, or within the manufacturing component, if they've got flowering, or they're doing things from the manufacturing side, there are also components on the IoT side to manage. So helping them understand what level of I guess the word I'm looking for is reliability to the state, and also transparency to the state. So this way they're getting as much information out as they're allowed to, and that's what they should. So this way they don't get in any kind of trouble. So that's the kind of the framework of kind of what we're trying to do here.
Can you, Joe, can you talk a little bit about like the mandates that are required? Like, is it storage? Is it the amount of cameras? what kind of mandates are states putting on these business owners
Sure.
that
So
that's
they're kind of
becoming
all
more
over the
complex?
place, but there's a couple of fundamental things. One is making sure that you're recording, 24/7, which is pretty typical.
Mhm.
But the 30-day kind of standard for campuses and finance and education, which is it's not really an industry standard, but it's more of a best practice of storing for 30 days, is kind of tossed out the window in this space, right? We're looking more like in the 90 days to
Oh wow,
180 days, so it's quite a bit
really?
more. And similarly to the pharmaceutical space, they being the states want to see as much footprint of a facility as possible. They want to see the gowning rooms, they want to see where people are working with product, where's product being stored. So it's not one camera in a room. It might be 4 or 6 cameras in a room with very specific shots, which then increases the amount of storage, which increases the amount of
Mhm.
networking, increases the amount of devices. So it is a lot more of everything. And that's one of the things that a lot of business owners aren't aware of, where they've got to buy something to develop, a product, but then I need all of this ancillary hardware in order to meet my requirements. And that's been a bit of an eye opener.
Interesting. What about like frame rate, resolution? Are they putting mandates on that, or is it just like we need a shot? As long as the shot's there, we don't care about the resolution and the frame rate.
Oh no,
And
there's definitely requirements for resolution, and actually it's reasonable. So like Illinois, that's where you are. So
Mhm.
Illinois specifically, like they have a pretty low requirement from a frame rate, it's like 4 frames a second. But
It's not
Illinois
bad.
wants to be able to log in and see live views 24/7 of every camera in your environment. And it's got to be, either hosted in a SaaS environment or through an SSL certificate. So this way, somebody in the state can log in and they can say, I want to see the gowning room, I want to see the shipping room, or I want to see a flowering room. They can log in, pull down any camera, and look at it live. So that's a bit unique and takes a bit to kind of build out from a technical perspective.
Interesting. So they and then who would be logging in from the state? Would it be law enforcement, or there's special dedicated departments within the city specializing for in cannabis? How does who would be
Yeah,
logging in?
it'd
Because
be
like
from a
if you're
state
logging in,
perspective. Yeah.
okay.
So it's from a state perspective, right? So there is an agency. So the agent officers are the ones that are logging into to kind of walk through, and you don't know when they're doing it, right? So they may log in at 3 o'clock in the morning. Doubtful it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning, but they'd have the ability to,
Wow.
So they would have like a roster of different companies, and on Thursday this week we're going to log in and just make sure we can spot check and see people working, see cameras, is the facility open or closed. When there's a change, if you're taking, say you're taking your video offline or you're taking devices offline, they want to be aware of it, especially if it's during business hours. So there's a lot of communication that happens between the business owner and the state. And it's not really at the city level; it's really at the state level.
Wow.
And
I mean, it's just sorry. Go
sorry,
ahead, Chris.
yeah, no worries. What do you think the underlying, motivation is for that? Obviously, monitoring and like control. I don't want to call it control, but control at some level, right? Because I don't know. I mean, is Illinois unique in that? So, I have two questions. One, what's the underlying motivation? And two, are they unique? Like, are other
Yeah,
states?
Illinois seems to be unique, and I would say the motivation is because it's so new for the state. They
Mhm.
just started taking this on as a business and tax, that they want to have a kind of a tight grip on what's going on.
Mhm.
Or you had somebody that the state had hired to work through the requirements, and they threw this in there because they knew it would be a difficult thing and it would give the state control. So I'm really speculating here. I have no idea kind of where
Yeah,
it would come from, but it is a very when the one client that I have there said they wanted this, I spoke to several peers and they're like, "What are you talking about? This is nothing common at all." So because I think it's so new as an industry within that state, that they're just wanting to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing.
Yeah,
and I
I
can
mean, just
go
so
ahead, bro. Sorry.
I was just saying that, this raises so many red flags, just the remote access piece of it, right? It's how do you protect the rest of the network if you have these third parties who you have no idea who they are remoting into your network and viewing cameras, as well as, how that those cameras are going to be, connected to, and the traffic that you're going to need to pull and things like that. It's just, it's mind boggling to me, that the state is actually requiring you to do this. Um, what kind of, do you know any of the type of fines that, or any issues that could arise if there's no compliance, or if you go out of compliance, for example? Like, for
So
example,
usually
all of a
it's
sudden you're yeah, go ahead.
yeah, usually it's a process, right? So once you're out of compliance, there would be a letter to say you're out of compliance and you have 10 days, 30 days, or whatever it is to comply, right? And then you have to prove that you're back into compliance. If you're not, then there's usually a second warning type of thing with that. And then I don't know what the fine structure would be, but then there's usually a fine, and then ultimately then your license is revoked, which is
Uh,
kind of the last resort thing. I would say that the investment that you have to put in to get these types of businesses off the ground, it's much easier to be compliant. It's much more of it's much more of a drive to be compliant than to try to
sure.
side skirt and not be compliant, you know?
Interesting. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you
No, all good.
the last time.
And we'll edit it. I'll edit all the interruptions out, so no worries. Um, what was I going to ask? Let me see here. So, and obviously each state's very different, right? Like Kirill and I were researching this about a month ago in terms of like, I mean, there's similarities between all the states, right? Like I happen to live in Colorado. Colorado's been kind of early adopter to this just because of the legal situation, or the laws have changed. I know you're in Washington, similar-ish circumstance. Um, so, in terms of, do you have, and when you look at this, like, and here's the question I was going to ask, and I remember now. The people, depending on the size of the organization, how many jobs they have, or how many storefronts, or whatever. But this isn't their core business, right? They don't necessarily like security, cameras, hardware. I mean, this is not the world they live in, right? They want to cultivate and sell, cannabis. And so obviously enter you in terms of how you can help design and then implement and, integrate some of these systems together. But what are you seeing there? Like, are you seeing that they're thinking about it because of the compliance side? Are you, what kind of world do you live in there?
So that's a really good question, and it's a really difficult answer, and it kind of follows across all industries, right? So
Mhm.
security is always on everybody's mind, and it never has enough funding,
Right.
and it's never thought about until the very end and go, oh wow, we have to deal with this now. But everybody knows that it's there, and you know. So one client was they did their own design. They had architects help them put stuff together without really understanding any of the operational considerations, any of
Mhm.
the infrastructure considerations. They put this whole thing in. I was then discovered and like, oh, can you come help get us to the finish line? And I go out there and I'm like, wow, there's a lot wrong here. We have to do an overhaul. We have to do a pretty big overhaul on a lot of things. And then once they realize that, yeah, that's what the state wants to see. They want to see camera views in this way. They want to see things wired up a certain way. They want, you want things done as industry standard as possible because that's what everybody resonates with, right? So
Mhm.
security, unfortunately, has no real standards. It's all best practice. And my best practice could be very different from your best practice, but wow, it's still going to work. So you try to have to distill it down as best you can and hope for the best. So in a perfect world, and I'm going to say I've done thousands of projects, right? I'm involved with one now for the very first time in my entire career. I'm on the design team with the architect for
Wow.
security. Low voltage AV is dovetailed. I'm dovetailed with structural, with environmental, and MEP, which has never happened before. So security is always When the project is like 75% done, then we'll bring somebody in and they'll get everybody upset because we didn't budget money to do this and we have to then make it happen. So it's a very common thing that it's an afterthought. And for some reason, this project, it's in New York and it's a big high rise. They thought ahead and they had me part of that design team, which has made things, it's new. It's kind of uncharted territory for me because now I have a direct line to the architect. I have a direct line to the IT consultant, and we can work through pathways and put where cameras are. And this is a little off track from cannabis, but it does relate as a whole that if you're building a new facility, having all the trades kind of working together as one team and one drawing set. So when it goes out to be built, it's one cohesive, kind of design. So that's been kind of refreshing, but I see it's always an afterthought. And kind of to the point that, security is not the business for these companies, right? It is a necessary evil. It ensures that their people aren't stealing from them. It ensures that the business is not, stealing from the state and that things aren't happening that's not legal or not ethical. So security is a good check and balance, but it's never brought in early enough to dovetail operational process, user experience, compliance reporting, support and maintenance. All these pieces are interrelated with each other and tied to the overall experience of the facility for the product being manufactured, the product being distributed, the employees' well-being coming into work every day, cash flow happening. All these attributes tie into the overall experience. And when they're fragmented, it becomes you're playing catch up.
And do you think that'll change? You think it's going to change, or you think it's going to? I know you said one customer; they're at the forefront. It'd be interesting to understand why. Perhaps someone there has experienced this before and maybe got out ahead of it. But do you see it changing, or are you just are we going to continue to tread water?
I don't see a change. I see change of this nature is so slow. I don't see it changing because it's not really a defined process. I think with this one client, it just happened because it dovetailed from another project, and they realized, and they brought me right in. But I think in the real world, it's going to be, pivot based on the schedule and the time and where we are today, and do the best you can do. I think is just the reality.
Joe, do you see cameras being leveraged for things outside the security realm, such as crop optimization, right? With the prevalence of video analytics and whatnot, like if you're putting this very expensive video surveillance solution together, you could essentially leverage those cameras to do things other than physical security. Maybe you're looking at how grow houses and how the crops are performing in terms of growth or whatever that may be. Can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah.
Or no?
So these are behaviors. These are behaviors that are available, and it's still emerging because, and I'll explain some of them. But the issue here isn't the technology. The issue here is the operations. It is having this technology available, and then how do you configure it, and then leverage that output from an operational perspective to provide value, because it is work to set up. I see huge value in, and I don't really use AI as a term because I'm not really sure that anything is truly AI, but we have good, strong machine learning models, and a lot of cameras today have higher compute in them that can do things like, very specific heat maps. We could look at, I'll give you a real world example, right? So a real world example would be a truck driver was bringing his semi into a campus, and you have 6 bays, and that truck is always coming into one of the 6 bays. It's there for 45 minutes, and then it leaves, and it makes a right turn and a right turn, and it leaves the campus. Well, if all of a sudden you've got a truck that makes a left turn instead of a right turn, that would be a violation of the norm, and that's where analytics in a camera can say, wait a minute, that violates a rule that I see where everybody always makes 2 rights and leaves, and this one's now making a left. Let's raise a flag and do something about that. Loitering is another good one, right? So you've got, trucks come in and they park and they're there for between 30 minutes and an hour and a half. And now you have a truck that's been there for 6 hours. Well, somebody
Mhm.
should know that it's been there for 6 hours. A guard in a command center is going to look up and see a truck at a bay and not think anything of it. So something like a camera with analytics by saying, this object, which would be the vehicle, has not moved in 6 hours or 4 hours. There's a threshold. I should notify, operations to say, hey, this is something wrong here, right? So those are
Mhm.
real world things that have to be identified. They have to be configured. Then they have to be triggered, and then an operational process on what to do with it. So that creates work for everybody. And everybody loves to talk about we can do all these things, but then the actual setup of that takes time and money. And that's where there's been some challenges, is how to actually implement a lot of these behaviors, because they've been around for a long time, right? You can do geofence and you can do counting and you can do direction. And we're now just taking that another step further by looking at what should it be, not just a static, I've reached a threshold and now I'm triggering an event. Now I'm looking for what is out of the norm, and that is something that requires a bit of learning and then react to that. So I see over the next few years, as the configuration of this and the integration to other platforms from the source camera or sensor gets
Mhm.
ingested, will become a little bit easier as it does in time, and then you'll see a lot more, similar to facial recognition, right? So everybody's been talking about it for 10 years, and it hasn't really gotten anywhere in a real real world environment. TSA is now starting to leverage it, but it's very local. But in the next couple of years, other places in the world use it more prevalent, but maybe for us, it'll start to be leveraged more as it becomes more reliable and the accuracy rate goes up higher.
Mhm.
Then the use cases will come out and then we'll start leveraging it. So it's all an evolution.
Hey Joe, let me ask you another question. So, can you give us an idea of the type of technologies, if you're building out a solution right now for the either grow house or the storefront, what kind of technologies are people leveraging? Are they using, or are they standardizing on certain vendors? Are they leveraging certain technologies that are not being leveraged in your typical environments? What does that look like? Can you give us an idea of what that looks like for the cannabis industry?
Sure. So there's not a real standard per se. It's just really long, what is your operational, I guess, output would be a better way to say it. Like, we want a camera, we need access control, we need intrusion, we need to have the ability to understand who came when and where and for how long. So it's not so much a particular product. But that being said, there are things that have to be considered. Typically, a larger enterprise type system versus maybe a mid-level, software as a service type platform where everything is in cloud and there's no ability to get to that data. Having something on-prem, I find to still be the best solution, and having a level of redundancy. So this way, that owner has all that data. They can, work with someone like me to extract reports if necessary. Uh, the products are geared more toward an enterprise type of client that have more features. Even if you're not using a lot of the features, they're available. Two-man anti-passback. There's things of that nature that give you kind of you need a larger system that has feature sets that are tailored more for large scale accounts, versus, even though it's, say a store that might have 4 doors in it, you don't want a small system that is designed for a 7-Eleven type environment because of the type of product in there. You need something that has
Mhm.
more feature rich capabilities. Redundancy is a very large piece of things, making sure that data is redundant, hardware is redundant. It does get a little pricier, but that ensures that you're going to maintain compliance. So, answering the question from not specific manufacturer, there's lots of good companies out there that deliver the solutions. So it's not really fair to pick one or two, but something that is
Yeah.
really tailored to handle enterprise is probably the better answer that I would give.
Got it. Got it. Thanks a lot.
So I know we're coming up on time here, but I know we talked a lot about cannabis, but are you focused on some other verticals? Like, what other areas do you play in?
I
Is it a
didn't.
customer calling you now?
No, he
Can you?
asked. I didn't actually hear the question. Sorry.
No, you're good. We talked a lot about cannabis, but where are some other verticals or kind of areas you play in or that you work with?
So I'm in the pharmaceutical space, which has kind of their cousin to cannabis. I do a lot of stuff. I do a lot of design and work in the financial sector, the technology sector, and the higher education sector. Those are my primary verticals.
Got it. Cool.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you. So just to level set, Joe and I think all three of us, we met at ISC West, and
Mhm.
I gotta say, Joe, you're probably one of the most technical people I've ever talked to. I could probably learn a lot from you in terms of the IoT integration side of the house, and that says a lot. So we definitely appreciate you being on this podcast and kind of giving us the lay of the land perspective of the cannabis industry. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.